site is called Lorenz Gun Club, and as Rick stated, it's named that because in the late 20s, an individual by the name of Otto Lorenz from Chicago came down and purchased a platform mound, which is just a flat top mound that existed right out here in front of where you see this boat, this flat bottom boat. And what then happened over the next few decades, quite literally, is that little parcels of the site were purchased, including where you see this mound here. On top of that was built a second gun club by a group from Rochester, New York. This house later came to be owned by the Robertson family, and this has ever since been owned by them. And so most of the central area of the site that we're now standing in, where you would have had the mound here, which is now gone. This is all modern development. And then these mounds out here represents kind of the center of the site. And so where we're standing would have been the central plaza for the community. And so just envision that you would have had structures built by the Mississippians on this mound, that mound, these two out here. And so this would have been the focal point for the community from about AD 1150 onward. So the site came to be known as Lorenz Gun Club because of the historic gun club that resided atop the mound behind us. But of course that has no bearing on what the site was, right. 700, 800 years ago.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. That's awesome. This is awesome.
Okay. So then the site is known to both the public and of course archaeologists, more importantly, as being a very large fortified village. And if you count down 3 utility poles on the road that you came in on here, that is where the south wall of the community goes back into, or east, into the Sangamon River, which is just behind this tree line here. The south wall of this community extends for just about 300 meters or so, or 350 yards, out into the prairie. And then from there, we have a west wall that protected the community that extended for about 350 meters or 400 yards. That runs back behind the mounds in front of us here, into the corn off in the distance, and then it meets up just beyond that tree line here, this tree line in our immediate view, with a north wall that then extends another 300 meters eastward back into the Sangamon River. And so we know the walls around this community were built first around AD 1150, and then they were likely maintained and rebuilt at least through the 1200s, if not the early 1300s. So most of our work over the past 6 years, so since 2010, has been within the fortified village. And we've been doing really kind of 2 main things. Of course, the archaeology that you traditionally think about, the square hole digging, where we use shovels, trowels, screens, and everything else. But in addition to this kind of traditional archaeology, we've also been doing what is called remote sensing. So this is a relatively new technology where we're able to visualize what's beneath the ground surface without actually having to move any earth, right? And so we run our devices over the ground surface, and we're actually able to see things that could not have been created through natural processes. And so what I'm talking about here are the walls that I mentioned previously, or these rectilinear shapes that are actually structures that are oftentimes buried a half meter to a meter below the ground surface. So with this information in hand, we can then follow up with the traditional archaeology right on top of where we know there to be important archaeological deposits.
Talk about how you guys came to come out here and learn about this. Just
sure.
Talk about the history of coming out here.
Yeah, sure. So I was finishing up my dissertation in 2009, and it focuses on the late prehistory of the Central Illinois River Valley, and so I was interested in developing a field site, and through another archaeologist from Western Illinois University, he put me in contact with Judge Bob Hardwick, And he and his family own about a third of the site, or a little more than a third of the site here. And so I came out to meet with him in the winter of 2010, told him what I would like to do, and he and his family wholeheartedly supported it. And we've been working on his part of the site, as well as the parts owned by the Robertsons, where we're standing right now, and then the Colemans further to the south since then.
When we're talking about what's specific culture are we talking about here, and
Sure.
what specific time frame?
Yeah, archaeologists refer to the culture as Mississippian. It's a broad, encompassing term that spans cultures from the lower Midwest down into the interior of the Southeast, from about AD 1000 to 15 or 1600 or so. And you know, the best example of Mississippian culture is seen in the American Bottom at sites like Cahokia and related ones that many people have seen before. But we also have similar, if not smaller, manifestations of Mississippian culture here in the Illinois River Valley from about AD 1100 onward.
Yeah, when people hear the term mounds, like Cahokia mounds, and you're talking about mounds here,
Yeah.
and you're not talking about a pitcher's mound. You're what exactly are you talking about when we refer to mounds in this context?
Sure. So mounds simply refers to the fact that these are earthworks constructed by the native peoples that inhabited this region, and in fact, earthwork or mound construction dates back millennia. Now, many of the mounds you see, like Monk's Mound at Cahokia or some of the flat top ones out here at Lorenz Gun Club, supported structures. So you'll notice they're flat on top, and they served as platforms upon which people would build council houses, communal buildings, and structures, domestic structures that chiefs and other leaders would live in.
It's very cool. And when did you guys start this, and how long you guys are finishing up this week?
So this summer we started May 14th, so mid-May, and we've got another 3 days after this to finish up our project. But as you'll see, we're well on the way to finishing it here. Notice is actually that we're walking down, right? We're declining on this road here, and this is important for several reasons. First and foremost, as we approach this utility pole here, 10 feet in front of us, this is where the north wall that protected the community enters back into the Sangamon River. Look at this and then turn 180 degrees to our west-southwest here. Envision a wall somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10 feet in height, running back just to the right of the end of the tree line that you see above the corn here. And this is that 300-meter long north wall that I was talking about. What's really interesting and what the geophysical research that we've done has been able to demonstrate is that at intervals of about 30 to 40 meters, we see these little boxes sticking out from this wall. And those, in fact, are called bastions. Bastions are also known as archers' towers. And so why they're spaced at regular intervals is that they provide overlapping fire with a bow and arrow to protect the community from, possible raiders or warriors from another village.
Mm-hmm.
Also, this swale that we're now entering down into here, at one point in time was an active channel of the Sangamon River. So last summer we did some geoarchaeological research in this swale here, and based upon the sediment's properties, as well as a series of radiocarbon dates, we were able to demonstrate that the river, which is now to our east, actually passed through the site here to the northwest at the time the village was occupied.
Seems like a very massive. It's almost like a town, like a village.
It is. It's a town, or it's the equivalent of a city. Some 700 years ago. This is what urban life would have been like in the Illinois River Valley at that time. And so now we're gonna head out this way, which is actually outside of the fortified village that we think of as Lorenz Gun Club. You'll notice as we walk up this corn path here, were starting to increase in elevation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so right now we would have been in what was the river at that time, but as we get higher and higher up, we did additional geophysical research last summer, and we found a series of magnetic anomalies consistent with structures a good 100 to 150 meters outside of the walls of the community. And so this really perplexed us at first because, you know, if you wanted to live in this community, of course you also probably wanted to live within the walls, at least when you felt threatened. So we started to do some preliminary work here last summer to figure out when these structures outside the community's walls were built. And what we were able to discover both last summer and now this is that these structures are actually early. They date about 50 years before the walls were built around the community. And so this provides us with a whole new narrative for the development of this site. And so what I'm actually saying here is that somewhere about AD 1100, a group of individuals, either local or non-local, we're still trying to figure out, came to settle this landform. That's Bo.
Hey, Bo.
And came to settle this landform, not to build walls and necessarily mounds at that point, but rather to settle right along the river here that would have been back behind us. And then a good generation or two later, they felt compelled to build what we see to our south, or what we could see to our south if the corn wasn't 7 feet high, which is the fortified village.
And how significant of a discovery is that?
Well, we have no other examples in the central Illinois River Valley of this in situ development of a first riverine community and then a later fortified village. So this provides us with an ideal kind of living laboratory to do work on the evolution of the Mississippian period in the central Illinois River Valley. So Jim, what you're seeing here is one of these what I described as rectilinear anomalies that we first detected last summer. It is about 2.5 meters from north to south and about 4.5 meters from east to west.
Okay.
And if you look down along the south side here, you'll notice that there is a deep trench that we have since excavated. That would have been the south wall of this structure. And then immediately in front of us is this north to south trending trench that would have been the east wall of the very same structure here. And so where we have all of our carpet padding, which helps us to retain moisture in the soil, would have been the interior of the house. And then the students are quite literally working within the walls of the structure here, digging out different elements to expose the construction technique.
So this was an actual house?
Yeah. To the best of our knowledge right now, we're interpreting it as a house. Of course, more broadly speaking, it's a structure. Interestingly enough, if we compare the types of artifacts that we've recovered here to what we've previously excavated within the walls of the community over the past 5 years, artifact density is very low. I would also add that many of the ceramics and stone tools, the actual raw material that the stone tools are made out of, are non-local, meaning they weren't harvested from a creek or stream bed in the immediate vicinity of the site, but actually come from areas like southern Illinois or even Missouri, suggesting that they were traded up to the site or brought up to the site with the community that first settled here.
And is it known that kind of trading was, common at that point in time?
Yeah. I mean, there's of course quite substantial evidence for that type of trading over many different time periods in prehistory here. But why this is significant in the time frame that we're talking about, some 900 years ago, is that we see the emergence of Cahokia and related sites in the American bottom. And then they seem to stimulate in one form or another the development of other Mississippian sites in the Illinois River Valley and other major river valleys of the lower Midwest.
Do you think there are a lot of other structures like this in this area?
Yeah, we at just a kind of a rough estimate, we have well over 24 structures that extend from a kind of southeast to northwest direction on this natural rise, and then there's a second natural rise that of course you cannot see right now because of the corn, but it's immediately to our west here. And so we see all these through our geophysical research, and this provides us with years of potential research doing the square hole digging that you see in front of you.
And I can see that this is a painstaking process. I see lots of like little tools there, so obviously, though, I guess you would agree with that.
Yeah. So our research protocol involves first stripping and screening the plow zone, the modern plow zone that all the corn is growing in. And then once we get about 20 to 25 centimeters below the ground surface, we establish 1 by 1 meter units, so just larger than a 3 foot, to collect not only the artifacts but the architectural information related to this structure here. So our collection units are relatively small, and most of the time they're excavated by hand as opposed to heavy machinery or even a shovel for that matter.
I mean, are there any, I guess, any tools that you guys have, or any artifacts in here specifically that you've uncovered that you've just said, wow, this is really neat?
I think I apologize for not having it out here, but a lot of the ceramics that we've recovered are very similar to what we see being made in the American bottom around the same time frame. Now, the question that can only be answered through laboratory research is whether this is an imitation or rather actually something that was made in the American bottom, around modern-day St. Louis and, of course, Cahokia, and then eventually made its way up the Illinois River Valley. That will take us another few months to answer.
So you guys, obviously, this is, even though you're wrapping this specifically up today, this is not the end of this research.
Oh, no. And, the old adage that I've been telling the students this season is that for every hour of work that you put in the field, you can anticipate anywhere between 6 to 10 hours of work in the lab. So, our field seasons that are 6 weeks are relatively short, and the artifacts as well as all the documentation will continue to be worked upon by my students in the laboratory for the next academic year.
Okay, and they spell Lawrence. I was going to ask how
Lawrenz.
They have that on here.
So Lorenz. It was Otto Lorenz, which is he was a. I didn't tell you this earlier, but he was a sausage producer in Chicago.
Right.
A meat magnet, if you will.
That's one way of calling it.
Yeah. He and his buddies, I guess, got together and decided that they wanted a gun club, a hunting club, down here in the Illinois River Valley. Mm-hmm. And at that time, of course, you have to remember that many of the backwater lakes and swamps that were in existence in prehistory in the Illinois River Valley still were here to a lesser extent in the 1920s. And so, this was an ideal place to go duck hunting. Waterfowl were relatively abundant. And of course, that's in part why you see, upstream from here, the reestablishment of the Emiquon Nature Preserve across from Havana.
Right. So, and it's so are you finding corn? You're finding like I guess what corn?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, we did earlier in the season, just in front of where Chris is working in a higher level, find some small charred pieces of corn cob. Which we, of course, wrapped up, stabilized, and have since taken back to the lab. And eventually we will send them off to a paleoethnobotanist that will identify the specific variety of corn that we recovered.
It's well, and I mean, obviously, we know that...
Looks very different than our modern corn.
Right, yeah.
Much smaller.
It's changed over the years.
Yeah.
But what I'm seeing here is that this is... They're referring. It's being referred to as the largest village in the. I mean, that's been discovered in the region.
Yeah, I mean, to the best of our knowledge, if you look at the aerial or kind of spatial coverage of the site here, it is the largest Mississippian village within the Illinois River Valley. there are similar sized, if slightly smaller, villages upstream from here, and a couple further downstream. But this was certainly the biggest.
And as far as, we're talking about, the other cultures of the time, was there a lot of interaction, do you think, between the people who lived here and folks, maybe down closer to St. Louis?
Yeah, I don't doubt it, especially during the early time frame that we're investigating this summer. We know Cahokia is booming at AD 1100 and continues at least for another 50 to 100 years. Now, the interesting story that we've worked on in previous summers is what happens sometime around 1200 or 1250 as Cahokia's influence in the lower Midwest begins to wane. And so it's in this horizon, around 1200 or 1250, that we see many villages become fortified, and the question is why. Is it Cahokia's influence waning, as I suggested before, or are there other issues at hand? And so research that I've been conducting with some paleoclimatologists from my university suggests that we're seeing some major environmental swings in this time frame when walls are being built around communities. I would also add to that the Michigan State University has been working at a site further upstream from here where we appear to see some immigrants to the Illinois River Valley that we refer to as Oneota. And so it is conceivable and possible that this group is interacting in a way that is not so friendly with the pre-existing Mississippians that inhabit the Illinois Valley, at least not at first.